teams. There's so many organizations out there that dread meetings, and they dread putting teams together and pulling people away from their quote unquote official responsibilities. You have we're here to sell cars, and it's a challenge, and it's a very disruptive thing to have meetings. So the more effective your meetings can be and the more impact they can have will take away that stigma that's out there. And it's out there for a good reason, because there's a lot of ineffective teams.
Welcome again to It Doesn't Take a Genius, conversation with introspective perspectives and pithy points of view. Here are your hosts, my friends, Max and Marty.
I think that's Mark and Mike.
Yeah, whatever.
Hello, Dave.
Hello, Mark. Thanks for having me.
Oh, my pleasure, and Mike Marshall's pleasure. For our audience members at home, both of you, who may be wondering why the episode didn't start with Mike Marshall screaming out, "Ramsey!" It's because he's not here. And we're doing some new episodes. Dave, you're going to be the first of these trials where we're just going to be interviewing some folks one-on-one. So stay tuned. We've got an improv actress who's gone viral coming up soon. We've got a marriage and family therapist who's been requested to basically start serving the business world coming up soon. And we've got you. So this is Dave Adamec for our audience. Let me just, I'll give you a quick introduction, Dave, if that's fair.
Thank you. Long-time listener, first-time participant.
That's exactly right. You and I and Mike Marshall, we all met on a GM project we were a part of years ago. We all at some point transitioned to a Ford project, which actually took you back home to your roots, right? Because you were on we have a lot of Ford dealers who listen, and they'll remember the XL 2000 program, which could you tell a little bit about like sort of how that was inspirational for you? You were like behind the scenes, right?
Yeah, so that's what got me hooked. I had the luxury of seeing the XL 2000 from behind the scenes role. And I had gotten my degree in human resource management, and everything just clicked. And I talked to the amazing facilitators and instructors that they had running that, and they provided a lot of guidance for me to go down the path that I went. But it was being a part of that project that I saw the power of what could be done in this space. So yeah.
And the space, that's a hard thing to define. You know, I just left a Chamber of Commerce meeting before coming to interview you, and it's like, what do you do? And it's, I tell people I help people wrestle and grow, and that can be in a number of areas. But that's how do you define it when people ask you what the heck you do? How do you explain the coaching and consulting and facilitating and everything else?
I always hope it's a long elevator ride with a lot of floors. No 30-second elevator speech in this regard. But it's along those similar lines. You're helping people grow, whether it's professionally or personally. In fact, some of the biggest compliments I get is when I have a manager who says, you helped me just as much at home as you did in my job. Because we all know that life impacts work, and you can't transform in one area and not transform in the other area.
Yeah.
So I help people develop into their best self.
Well, speaking of,
it's not just an individual level too.
100%.
It's on an organizational level as well.
100%. I love that. Very well said. And speaking of growth, you're one of the most growth-oriented people I know. You take it so seriously, and we don't have time for the backstory of how seriously you took finding a business school that had the right program for what you were looking for, but you are sort of coming out of a very research intensive MBA program with some really top-notch, top-flight scholars and researchers involved. And you and I, that's why we're here, frankly, is you and I got to talking about some of sort of the conventional wisdom that had been a little bit debunked there. And it just sounded perfect for the kind of things that our listeners are looking for, because all of our listeners are involved for the most part in teams, whether it's a management team, an employee team, a task force, a committee that they're a part of, what have you. And so we're going to talk about that. And I hope, I'm just going to go ahead and say this out loud, Dave, that I really hope we talk about the Guinness World Record you hold and how that ties into the topic today. But this idea of teams, and you said something to me before we pressed the record button, that you sort of put it in your head that it was like a choice between inclusivity and impact. I think those were the words you used, that when you're putting together a team, a small group that's going to be working on something, there's inclusivity on one side and impact on the other. Could you say a little bit more about that?
Well, and it's interesting, for years and years and years of doing coaching and managing teams and working in organizations, there was just this idea of, let's make sure we don't forget anybody. Let's make sure everybody's involved. So I would go into a dealership and you'd think about, okay, let's get a dozen or so people. 10 to 12 people was just the magic number when you're putting a team together. Let's get a couple people from sales. Let's get a couple people from service. Let's get the dispatcher. Let's get an advisor. Let's get a cashier. Let's just make sure a porter, everybody. So we get all angles, right?
Every department, every role, just the whole thing.
And you just let everybody talk and you get all the ideas, and the more the merrier, because who knows who might have the best idea. And so that was how it was for ages and ages and ages. And I never thought differently about it. And then, I was going through my MBA and I was taking a project management class, and I got my paradigm completely shifted based on the content and the professor. And I really opened my eyes, and it led me to do more of my own research. Like, okay, wow. I didn't even think of this before. What's out there that I don't know already based on this? And I'll give a plug to Illinois, because I will say I was I'm a little older in my career path, and it was always one of those things where I pushed it off because I don't have time for this. Life's too busy already. How am I going to fit grad school in? And the neat thing about Illinois is they have shut down their brick and mortar MBA program. It is 100% all online. And they did this before the pandemic. They saw this coming. They saw the future. So they're top professors, and they have some of the best professors in the world that are teaching this MBA program. And it's all virtual. The office hours are virtual. The classes are virtual. And in some ways it's better, because like you and I are using this technology face-to-face right now. I mean, I was having one-on-one conversations with my professors on the 4th of July from the comfort of my own home, talking about whatever, and it was an amazing experience. However, the one challenge with that experience was we had a lot of group projects, and when you have a cohort that is a little bit larger in size and it changes every term, there were people in your cohort that knew, I'm never going to see these people again, as opposed to maybe a traditional MBA class. And so I was fascinated by this whole group dynamic. What makes a group work? What challenges a group? And so I came away with my MBA with a lot of real world experience on effective groups, and also a lot of research based evidence on effective groups.
So they were training. That's interesting. They're giving you research and training on groups while they have you in groups. So you're getting the practical application of that. So you mentioned, get everybody involved. That's the typical model we've followed. I remember when I was in school in the 90s that, there was sort of small group theory, that at about 12, there was this sort of magic thing that happened, and the group dynamics changed to where now you're really dealing with a large group once you get, around 12 and beyond. And so for you, it was there was a little more of a hardcore formula about how they came up with what would be the right group size, I guess.
So what we were learning, and I think it's evolving as we speak, there is more and more research being done on this. But when we were talking, for instance, in my project management class, that magic number was around 6 to 9, and one of the professors was talking about no more than what you could fit at a dinner table with everybody together. And we're not talking like the Thanksgiving table, your dinner
Right.
table where you drag up the folding chairs from, the basement, but like
Right.
something where everybody can be sitting around in a circle, and 6 to maybe 9 at the very, very max. But this
Mm.
formula that you were alluding to, uh, it talks about the communication channels and how complex things can get really fast. And the formula is basically you take the number. So let's say you've got a group of 5, right?
Mhm.
So you take the number times the number minus 1, you divide it by 2. Now I know it sounds complicated, but really, if you've got 5, it's 5 times 4, which is 20,
Mhm.
divided by 2, which is 10 communication channels. So if you've got a group of 5 people, there's 10 communication channels.
So
But here's the
that's each
interesting thing:
person on that group communicating with each
how
other
many
person on
people
that group.
they have to, connect with.
Right. Okay.
What's interesting is if you just go from 5 to 10, the communication channels don't double. Based on that formula, it
Right.
is 4.5 times the number of people you
Okay.
have to communicate with. And so that's how fast it can get very complicated.
So this
And
is
you think
like
about
it's not a straight line. This is a what's the
curve.
exponential? That's the word. It's an
Mhm.
exponential number. Wow.
So and this made sense because I would think about the challenges of finding a time to meet,
Yeah.
and finding agreement with a particular idea, and finding, and a big thing is finding the time to speak. And when I did further research on this, like a lot of research talked about keeping people engaged and keeping people creative. And let's say you got a 45-minute meeting and
Yeah.
you've got 10 people in that meeting, right? You're thinking, well, there's a few minutes at the beginning just to get everything started in small talk. And then you've
Right.
got a few minutes at the end to finish wrap up. Every person is going to have maybe 4 minutes in that meeting, if everything's equal, to
Yeah.
share their ideas, to participate in the group discussion. And that's a real challenge.
So this has come up again and again. You and I have been brought in and we're supposed to help fix a process in a certain department. And we bring in a representative from each role and outside representatives from other departments that are somewhat stakeholders and so on and so forth. And, the next thing you know, you've tried to be inclusive, to use your word. And what you've done is had some people who didn't get to have their say in the meeting.
And
And
then it backfires.
and that backfires, right? So I know you use the word sabotage, and I thought that was exactly appropriate. I've had meetings where, that one guy, is he ever going to talk? Is he ever going to contribute? And then it turns out he's been bad mouthing us.
Hmm.
So
And it could be one of two things. It could be that he's just in that meeting for the free lunch or to get away from
mhm,
his responsibilities.
mhm,
And when he's in a big group size, he can kind of hide in the shadows. Uh,
yep,
or it's somebody who really wanted to be in that meeting, but then is not as outgoing as some other people
yep,
and doesn't get their chance to share their ideas. So if their ideas are not included in the content, of course, when they leave that meeting, they're not going to be saying, "Oh, it was great and we're making terrific progress." They're going to be the ones that are saying, "We're not getting anything done.
yep,
It's a waste of time,
yep,
and we're going down the wrong path." And then the reputation of the group is damaged because of that.
yep,
And not only just the reputation, but the impact of it. The
right.
buy-in when the final solution is created.
Oh, you bet. 100%. And you said I'd never heard this, but Steve Jobs had a rule of 3 to try to sort of fight that sort of lack of ability to get things done in a group.
Yeah, so when my paradigm shifted and I realized that maybe I need to rethink how I go about effective teams and effective groups. When you do any research on things, Steve Jobs inevitably pops up in a Google search, and his rule of 3 was no more than 3 to 5 people, no more than 3 topics, and no more than 30 minutes. And he could be very ruthless about cutting people from the team. And that hit home to me because I looked at these group projects that I had for my MBA, and those were group sizes of 5 to 6 people.
Mm.
He talked about 3 to 5. I would have loved to have cut one or two people from a lot of these groups that were just not interested in participating.
Right.
And you ended up having a group of 3 to 4 people every time anyways,
Yeah.
with just one or two hangers on.
Yeah. You're making me think back to college days, and I'm not going to tell stories, but I really want to, about the time that we, showed up at the group members' apartment, and we went out to get supplies, and we came back and the rest of the group members were asleep. One of them in her bed, like had just pulled up the covers. And anyway, I'm not going to tell those stories. That's not what I'm here to do, Dave. But I do want to talk about, Jobs was managing teams, it sounds like, to make sure that, he maximized impact. And you made a point to me earlier about, sort of trying to manage the inclusivity instead, which, it takes up a lot of headspace for whoever's facilitating or leading the team. But that's, you're arguing that that's pretty counterproductive to actually getting the impact.
Well, I remember when I would be going into dealerships and I'm running the teams and I'm focused on making sure everybody had their voices heard. And you could fall into the trap of you're sitting there and you're, okay, did John over there, has he really spoken much yet? And I haven't heard Jennifer's opinion on this. And you're constantly wanting to make sure that everybody got a chance, as opposed to just sitting there, jumping in and exploring right with them the topic at hand. And then you'd spend a lot of time coaching that team leader. Let's say they're running the next meeting and you're sitting there and you're talking to them about, hey, we got to make sure that we include so-and-so a little bit more next time. And we want to get more out of this person. And boy, I look back, it's funny. You look back and you go, wow, I was wasting a lot of time on things that I wouldn't have had to waste the time on had my group been smaller, tighter, with the right people in it. We would have just attacked the problem or the issue and gone after it.
Yeah. And, could you still have had buy-in from staff? I think the answer is, when I say staff, I mean people outside of the team. I think the answer is yes, as long as the people on that team, I always ask my clients, who do you want on the team? And I'll say they need to be positive, they need to be knowledgeable, and they need to be respected. They need to be somebody that can be sort of a community leader for that area that they're going back to, and be willing to advocate for whatever the team came up with that has been blessed by management or what have you. But I think you'd have that, right? Like if you had the people on the team that were there to do the work.
There's no reason why team members can't reach out and collect information and gather ideas and gather input outside of those meetings.
Yeah. Get them included anyway, the people that aren't on the team.
Yeah, but when you have such a short time frame, and let's face it, meetings are disruptive. And we are taking people away from their crucial role in the organization, and somebody else has to pick up the slack for them while they're stepping away from that role. And so there's some animosity there that can build up if you've got people that are going away, and then you find out from that person that the meeting was unproductive or they didn't think anything was accomplished.
Right.
And that's why you see a lot of meetings, I think, fail to sustain themselves for the long run, because people find the negatives that are happening don't outweigh the positives. So meetings really have to be productive.
Yeah, and that's that whole, like you were saying, those communication channels that are exponentially growing, or maybe it's logarithmically growing. I don't know which term applies, but the idea that all that communication is also opportunities for conflict, in either, somebody taking over, Crucial Conversations talks about silence and violence. Some people take over and it's a little violent, they try to force their opinions, and other people withdraw, and that's silence. So you can get both of those happening in all of those different communication channels, which means it's that much more to manage. I feel very guilty about some of the teams I've launched over the years based on this conversation. 100%.
It's interesting to look back, and there are those people that have great ideas, but they're just not that vocal, and it is harder for them to open up in a group of a dozen people with
Yeah.
all those eyeballs versus maybe there's just 3 other people in front of them where they feel a little bit more of a safe space to share what they may
Totally.
not be confident is the best idea, and usually is a great idea.
Yeah. Yeah. So let's talk about one of your experiences in your past, just to sort of take us into the home stretch here, where you put together quite a team to accomplish a Guinness World Record. Are we allowed to say what it is? Is it still like a thing we
Oh
can say?
yeah, yeah, of course. Yeah,
Okay.
we still hold the record.
You
So
still hold the
by
record.
all
Okay.
means, we still hold the record.
Am I right? It's largest. No, I'm sorry. Loudest
About it.
portable sound system.
So, well, there's a key component in the portability of it. It's the loudest human carried
All right.
sound system. Yes,
Of
it's got to
course.
be human carried, and there was a rule on that. We had to
Yeah.
have it. Every participant had to have it held for 5 minutes. It was interesting working with the Guinness people. There were some very particular. The wind had to be at a certain level. The ambient noise had to be at a certain low decibel level. I remember we're out on the beach, and I've got all these reading devices for wind, for decibels, to see are we in a spot that's safe enough to even hold the record, to attempt the record. But
So
we would have to take a long
I
time to
was going to
explain
say,
to
well,
that.
we will be linking to Dave's contact information, and I think you still have. Is it an Instagram account? That's the main way that Team Jetpack
Well,
is.
LinkedIn. Well, yeah, for Team Jetpack, there's Instagram, Facebook. The
Yeah.
typical
So
social media.
So we'll make sure that those are all in the show notes, as we say, because
Yeah.
it's an amazing story. But could you speak a little bit about? I mean, you did. I mean, you are West Coast. You're California. You also have a lot of Midwest connections, and we're in the sort of the Detroit, Wisconsin corridor for a while. But could you talk about this team that you assembled that eventually was able to achieve what you achieved? Because it's, I mean, again, we don't have time for all the the hardship that you endured to get there, but you did have to wrestle with the team. So how does some of this that we've talked about apply there?
Well, I wish I would have had my MBA under my belt before I
Yeah.
attempted this Guinness World Record, because it would have been a much easier process. I have an amazing group of friends, and the team of people that participate, it's all voluntary, right? And
Huh.
there's a lot of things we try to do to give back as well, and as well as I do, there's the people get into that, and they love doing stuff, like we did stuff with the Children's Hospital and
Yeah.
and grade schools and stuff. But
Right.
managing that many people, you love having so
Yeah.
many people that are willing to participate,
Right.
and lend their hand just out of their own charity, but
Right.
trying to organize that, right? And there's things where you need dozens and dozens and dozens of people to do, especially for
Right.
when we set the record. And then there's times where, boy, you need a core group of people to figure out the logistics. And so I struggled with when was a large group necessary and when was a small group necessary. And every time we talked about teams, we're talking about it today, there is no magic number because it varies.
Yeah.
I think what the theme of this is we often err too large. We often err
Mhm.
on the inclusivity versus the impact side of things. And so if there's a takeaway from this is to analyze, are all these people really necessary? Can we do it with a fewer amount and find
Yeah.
that maybe we'll actually be more impactful? And when I was doing the Guinness record, I think that's where my biggest thing, looking back and saying, I probably could have used that methodology a
Yeah.
lot better.
You mentioned NASA being 8, and
Yeah, that was an interesting fact. NASA and the space shuttle had 8 astronauts, and now here we are today, and SpaceX, they decided 4 is
huh,
the number.
huh.
That's right. So they have 4 astronauts on their missions.
It's fascinating, and again, you need to go research Dave, and frankly hire Dave if you're in the situation to need somebody to facilitate groups, because he's spot on with a lot of this. The one other thing that I thought I wanted to bring up because it always bothers me when I see something that I'm not sure how it lines up with the Bible. That's what always boils down to me. And so I was thinking, did Jesus have it wrong? Is that what we're saying? And your last point, was the good one, right? That well, it's going to depend on the point of the team and what kind of impact you're trying to have. 12, and I'm just going to nerd out for just a second, and then we'll wrap this up. But 12 is a symbolic number in the Old Testament that represents multiplication. And what was the point of Jesus drawing 12 disciples who are going to follow him around while he's here on earth? Well, the goal was multiplication, right? They were supposed to go out, and frankly, those 12 were going to have their own 12, and 12 and 12 and 12, and all the 12s having another 12, and pretty soon you've got this, gigantic spike, which is exactly what happened. So that was the point of that team, was to multiply. What we're talking about here, these are task forces that are dialed in on something that is a pain point usually, or a huge opportunity, a new thing for these clients of ours. And I think you make a great point, erring on the side of impact instead of on inclusivity, and what can we get away with here to get the job done. So it's really well said. Anything else you want to add as we wrap up, Dave, that just people might want to know about things you're doing, or points that you want to make?
Well, I think that the big thing here is when it comes to teams, there's so many organizations out there that dread meetings, and they dread putting teams together and pulling people away from their quote unquote official responsibilities. You have we're here to sell cars, and it's a challenge, and it's a very disruptive thing to have meetings. So the more effective your meetings can be and the more impact they can have will take away that stigma that's out there. And it's out there for a good reason, because there's a lot of ineffective teams, and there's a lot of things we talked about in today that can sabotage you without you even realizing it. So I think it's a very important discussion, and that's why I walked away from my MBA with this as one of the hot topics that I latched onto, that I didn't realize going in that I was going to, because like you said, we were just kind of going with what we thought the inclusivity was the key role here. And it turns out that there's a lot more to think about when designing teams.
I love that. Mike and I were just talking about, how there's this is something that I've been seeing happen, where a Gen Z employee who has never been taught about interpersonal skills, and maybe, went through, the pandemic and so on, they might actually get up and leave the room when things get heated. So these are, this is the kind of stuff that's going to be happening, and managing those group dynamics, to err on the side of impact is key to the whole company moving forward, the whole organization. So great stuff. Thank you so much for being our first special guest in this, wonderful sense that we have now. So
it was my honor. Thank you so much for having me.
Well, I'm going to turn it over to our mutual friend, Mr. John Wolf, to take us home with his dulcet tones in voiceover work.
And that's it. Join us next time when you'll hear Mike say, well, I'm sure he'll say something pithy. Don't miss it. Next time, it doesn't take a genius.
That's good enough.